welcome to Overtime Hockey Talk. My name is Mark Paul, and my co-host Justin Baker here. Well, not here. He's not in the room with me, but it often feels like he is.
I do wish I was in the room.
I mean, even when we're not doing the podcast, sometimes I like you have your phone isn't even in your pocket, and you're like, "Well, why my leg's vibrating?" And it's not really there. That's how I feel about you sometimes. It's just like, "Oh, Justin's here." Oh, no, actually, I haven't seen him in months. Have I seen you? When's the last time I saw you in person?
My wedding, I think. Yeah. I think you still got my belt, too. So
I do still have your belt. Yes, I've worn it. I've used it another time where I was like, crap, where's my belt? Oh, well, here's Justin's. I'll just use it again. So thanks for the belt. On today's show, we are going to preview the Metropolitan Division, at least the first half of it, going in alphabetical order through Carolina, Columbus, New Jersey, and the NYIs. We are now, after today's show, more than halfway through all the teams. So we're making good progress. If you haven't heard Central Division and Pacific Division, we've done all those, every team, and given playoff predictions and broke down pretty much everything there is to break down between those all those teams, and we'll continue to do so here in what might be the most interesting division in the entire league here, the Metro. It's probably the best division in the league for my money. We'll see what you think. And let's dive right in. Carolina Hurricanes. Let's talk just a quick overview of the additions and subtractions, because this team is like hilarious to look at their subtractions and then who they added. Now, of course, they traded Warren Fogle to the Edmonton Oilers for Ethan Bear, so there's that swap. Dougie Hamilton leaves for greener pastures in New Jersey, and literally they actually have more green on their jersey. So that's kind of the two big losses from the skater perspective. This might be the first time I've ever seen a team lose all three goalies in an offseason that played significant amount of games for them in the season. That's Alex Nedeljkovic, Peter Mrazek, and James Reimer, all out for the Carolina Hurricanes, and in Frederik Andersen, Antti Ranta, and I third goalie, I don't know if they have another one somewhere. I'm sure they do, but those are the two guys they signed. They also obviously get Jesperi Kotkaniemi in the offer sheet. They also signed Derek Stepan, Josh Levo, Tony DeAngelo. We can get into that a little bit. That was a controversial signing when it happened. And then Ian Cole and Brendan Smith, former Red Wing, also joined the team. So lots of movement for this Carolina Hurricanes team. So I want to ask you, Justin, so many changes to the team, especially goaltending. I mean, it's obviously completely different. Can they, for lack of a better word, indoctrinate this many players around their culture really quickly as the season starts and kind of get everyone on the same page?
Yeah, I think so. To be quite honest, they've got the right head coach for it. They've got a good group of forwards and still a good group of defenders left over. I think it's going to be very, very easy. I mean, look, obviously that back end is led by Brett Pesce and Jacob Slavin. So, honestly, I think with those two guys back there, I think it's pretty easy to ease the other sort of, for lack of a better term, ease those guys in. And look, they went out and they got the right goaltenders, right? You bring in Freddie Anderson and Antti Ranta if you're going to, do a wholesale change in goal. I mean, you brought in good veteran guys that have been there, that have, been in winning cultures, that have been in losing cultures. So they've seen both sides of the coin. And so they know what it's going to take and what's going to be required of them. And so I think with all that said, not having lost major pieces up front is definitely going to help. And for me, more than anything else, so I think the big reason why I think, they can make these massive changes is because of a guy like Rob Brendamore. He is that type of coach that guys show up and want to play for, because listen, I don't know if you've seen that guy work out, but he works harder than anybody else still skating, and he's way more intimidating than any, if you want to call him bottom forward fighter type guy. So if he gets at you, you're going to work.
Yeah, you're right about that. I mean, obviously the right they have one of the best coaches in the National Hockey League. I think that's especially he's kind of like that old school, like hard-nosed coach, but in a new school kind of way where he's not quite, I don't think that he's the embarrassment kind of hard-nosed kind of guy. He's kind of the new age of the hard-nosed coach.
He would be like, to me, he was the kind of coach that I think Columbus thought they were going to get out of John Tortorella, that hard-nosed kind of old school guy. And you know what? I think it worked out much, much better for Carolina. That's for sure.
They also have a better team and a team where people want to go play. They want to go to the city and play. Let's just circle back to the goaltending because last year, Frederik Andersen played 24 games, an .895 save percentage, and that's on the best team in the division. I mean, obviously he had some injury problems, right? Like, and maybe we can point to a lot of his poor numbers as the big problem. But when you look at Jack Campbell's numbers, they're significantly better. So you know that it wasn't just, the team around him didn't play as good a defense. Like, that's always kind of been a little bit of a potential shtick in Toronto that, their defense just isn't as good. And so, he gives them more. But Jack Campbell in his 22 starts, a .921 save percentage at .215 goals against. So significantly better than Frederik Andersen. And you got to ask the question about Andersen, was it an injury and he's fully healed? Because he has had nagging groin issues for multiple years now. And then you go over to Antti Ranta, who, let's face it, since 18-19, he has played in 47 games. Like in the last 3 years, he played 12 games. He played 33 in 19-20, and then he played in 12 games last year. And last year was his worst season of his career outside of his rookie year with the Chicago Blackhawks. A .905 save percentage, .336 goals against. That's a rough. I mean, on a terrible team, so I understand that, but he hasn't been able to stay healthy. So my biggest concern, not necessarily that these guys aren't good goalies when they're healthy, but what happens if both these guys go down? You're looking at what? Alex Lyon. I don't know who Beck Warm is. If anybody out there listening knows who Beck Warm is, but he's a goalie in Carolina's system. He played 14 games last year in the AHL. So never heard of him before. Beck Warm. I like the name. That's all I got. But Alex Lyon is the one goaltender in their system beyond these two guys that has NHL experience. He's played with the Flyers for the last 4 years in a largely very large backup role. The most games he's played is 11. He's played in 22 NHL games. So there's your third guy if both these guys go down, or frankly, if either one of these guys go down, then Alex Lyon is your next guy up probably, unless one of these younger guys, all of which are 22 years old, can come up and do something. So that to me is a pretty big worry. Like when you go from having Peter Mrazek and Nedeljkovic, both guys stayed pretty healthy all year long, and Mrazek has been pretty solid for you for a good amount of time now. And now you go to two guys who are injury prone and on the other side of 30. Are we worried?
Yeah, so there's the concern, right? And so for me, let's start with Peter Mrazek, right? Basically, Toronto and Carolina swapped goaltenders, right? Andersen and Mrazek. And so the question for me is, you know what? Maybe because Carolina went from, Mrazek starting 40 and 40 the 2 years prior to last, and he's put up some good numbers when he's been healthy. And you know what? He basically gets pushed aside because he has some injuries last year, and Nedeljkovic shows up and he basically steals the show, right? He has a career year. I mean, obviously his first real year in this league, and some people can point to and say, oh, it was a contract year. Guys typically tend to play better. But at the same time, this guy's young enough to where maybe you look at it and you say, okay, well, maybe he's finally starting to develop. Maybe he's finally coming into his own.
Well, and he's playing on a really good team. So, yeah, his
right.
9.3 .0 save percentage might be a little less than that on a lesser team, but he had a great year nonetheless.
No, absolutely. Had a great year. And so when you look at both those guys, I want to know, for one thing, you look at Mrazek and you think, okay, was the relationship damaged there because they went from him, basically Mrazek carrying this team a little bit on his back, when they really didn't have anybody, a number one in goal yet for the last couple of years. And then they say, oh, cool, now Nedeljkovic is developed. We're bringing him in. Thanks, but no thanks. We're going to basically push you aside now. Or was it just basically, they weren't willing to pay up, more than 1 year for him?
Well, that's the weird thing is that it's not like, okay, so Mrazek goes and signs 3 years at 3.8. Then they sign Frederik Andersen for 2 years at 4.5 and Antti Ranta 2 years at 2. And Alex Nedeljkovic, he didn't even get that. Like, he got what, 3.5? $3 million. Yeah. It doesn't make sense to me why you would, why you're so happy to trade away a 25-year-old goaltender who had a career year for you, who wants a very reasonable amount of money for a couple of years. But then you go and you sign Frederik Andersen, who has never won a playoff round and has struggled with injury the last couple of years. Like, it seems to be a strange bet. Like a very unnecessary bet. They could have just bet on the guy that they knew. Instead, they go and they bring Frederik Andersen. I wonder, what did Jake Gardner have to say about Frederik Andersen? It's funny because Jake Gardner and Frederik Andersen have been through some pretty brutal playoff losses together. So we'll see if they can bring some bad luck upon the Carolina Hurricanes.
Yeah, don't get me wrong. I don't see the logic in getting rid of Nedeljkovic, especially because from what I understand, it was over basically $500,000 for such a young guy.
And then they went and gave way more to Andersen anyways.
Right, and I get it. Andersen is probably the only one out of this group who has more than 2 years of starter experience, and maybe that's what you've been missing in Carolina. But
he's 31.
Right, exactly. He's on the wrong side of 30, and he's basically had mediocre years the last couple seasons. So, it's not like he had a good year last year and Toronto just wasn't willing to pay up the money. Andersen was just mediocre last year and got outplayed by Jack Campbell.
Yeah. It's really probably the biggest question mark for me coming in. The Dougie Hamilton, what are you going to do? He signed for $9 million. Like, you're not going to sign him for that kind of price for this team and for what else they have to to probably do here. With Trocheck and Niederreiter and those guys' deals ending, you got to be thinking that they're probably capped out. They weren't going to just hand over all that money to Dougie Hamilton. Especially with Dougie
Martin
Hamilton.
Martin Nish is coming up too. That's the big contract. He's going to need a huge, maybe not, $7-8 million, but he's going to need a significant raise.
He's going to get paid. It's $9 million is a lot of money to spend on a Dougie Hamilton when he has had some injury issues. He's had some personality issues. He's still a really good player. Nobody's going to go, oh, crap, you have Dougie Hamilton on your defense. That sucks. Like, he's a really good player. But you also got to think, all right, is it like, when is this guy going to slow down? He's 28. He's probably got another couple years before he really starts to slow. But the amount of years that he was signed for, it's going to be hard for him to fulfill, all 7 years of this contract, putting up 50 plus points in all those years.
You think New Jersey would have learned their lesson with PK Subban's contract, right? But
well, we'll actually get to New Jersey too, here in a minute. Let's jump over to Jesperi Kotkaniemi. They give up a first and a third and $6.1 million in cap space, which really in the cap space for them, not a big deal. They've got zero of it, so obviously They've spent it all, and some of that is on Kotkaniemi. But it's not like they were going to go out and sign another guy at $2 million. Like I don't think that's that big of a deal for this season, and I don't think long term he'll make $6 million. I think that it'll be less than that. Now, obviously, I know all about they'll have to match if they get to that point. They'll have to match for at least $6.1 million. And then they run the risk of him making that amount because he can then just say, yeah, accept your match. But I don't know how I feel about giving up a first and a third for a guy who, I mean, he was benched in the playoffs, and that's the place you want to go, right? Like you want to make it to where Montreal made it, and he was getting benched. What do you think about this move?
Yeah, it's curious. Don't get me wrong. I mean, I understand. He's still young, right? He's 22 years old, 21. He's still young enough to where he can still develop. He can still turn into a really quality player who's worth $6 million. But, from what I've seen so far, the one preseason game with Carolina, he looks like he fits in all right. From what it looks like, he's probably going to play third line minutes based upon their depth chart at the forward position. But long term, maybe their plan is when Jordan Stahl's contract is up in 2 years, maybe that's where you see Kotkaniemi kind of slide into that second line center spot maybe.
Do you think they're going to play him on the wing, or are they going to play him at center?
Well, so right now they're putting him on the wing, on that third line with Trocheck. But, how long does that last? Because obviously,
preseason,
Sebastian Aho and Jordan Stahl are your number 1 and 2 center. There's no doubt about that. Vincent Trocheck, obviously, I think he's best at center too. So there's your 1, 2, 3, however many minutes you want to give each guy. And so obviously they're not going to pay $6 million to put, Kotkaniemi on the fourth line to play center. So he's obviously going to be playing wing this year. And it's just a matter of with whom and how many minutes a night he gets.
Yeah. Yeah. The first and the third, for a guy who's scored all of what? He's scored like 22 goals in 171 games. He's not someone who's scoring goals at all. And I don't see that all of a sudden he's going to go out and score 20 goals. I don't see it happening for him. But not that he can't produce other places, and not that he's not a productive player, but to give up a first round pick, like think of the value of a first round pick and the players you could acquire for said first round pick. Like it is a big gamble. Granted, I know their first round pick. They hope that it's somewhere they hope that it's 32nd overall, so that it really doesn't matter. But it's there always is the potential that pick, things don't work out. You have a weird off year and you don't make the playoffs, and suddenly you're looking at that pick as a top 15 pick, and you're missing out on someone because you chose to spend it and bring in a guy. If Kotkaniemi doesn't work out, then it's a big risk. And again, I guess the kind of the theme of their offseason seems to be, let's take a lot of risks where we don't have to.
Right.
That's sort of the way that I see it.
And you look at the guys that they could have gotten free agency, right, for $6 million. They could have brought somebody in on a 1-year deal like a Mike Hoffman, who probably is going to give you 25 goals this season. And, there's little risk. You don't lose a draft pick, and there you go.
Yep, I agree. Last thought. Anthony DeAngelo, I know a lot of people don't like him because he, is just outspoken about things that some people disagree about. But from and I know that he's kind of been a rough teammate at times. Some people don't like him. Again, I think it's because he's outspoken about what he believes in, and that's what it is. For 1 year, $1 million for Anthony DeAngelo, who could go out and put up the same kind of numbers that Dougie Hamilton put up, is a potential absolute robbery and a steal if that one works. That's like the one risk that I know people were mad that they signed him, but that's like the one risk that it was like, yeah, take a risk on this guy. 1 year, $1 million. You can bury him in the minors. You can tell him to go home. Like, it's really not that big of a deal. He's just here to play hockey. Like, you're not going to agree with everybody, but Anthony DeAngelo is the one risk that I think it's like, yeah, why wouldn't you take that risk? 1 year, $1 million for a guy who put up 53 points a couple years ago. And the only reason why he didn't probably do it last year is because the Rangers didn't like him.
Yeah, I mean, don't get me wrong. He's had his locker room issues and his off-ice issues, right? But I think, Carolina is a good place for players to go that maybe need that rehab, right? Maybe need to get their heads straight, get things back in line, and really rehabilitate their image and their personality. And so, I think if there's any team out there, Carolina is as good as any that provides enough leadership in the locker room and behind the bench and, up in management. So, from a production standpoint, right, you look at that, it's high reward, low risk for them too. I completely agree. If you get any sort of production out of him at all, if he's any shell of his former self, even if he puts up, say 20, 25 points, that's still a win-win as far as $1 million, assuming he doesn't, cause a ruckus in the locker room, because again, you have a good nucleus of players and a good chemistry, a good thing going on in Carolina with those jerks. And
I thought they were a bunch of jerks. I thought that he would fit in perfectly, and everybody got mad about it. I mean, it's weird.
And good thing is he's an RFA, so even if he does really, really well and they just can't re-sign him, say he wants a huge raise or something like that, he's an RFA, so they're not going to lose him for nothing.
Right, absolutely. Okay, well, we'll move on to the Columbus Blue Jackets, who made a few big splashes. The Blue Jackets go out and, of course, trade Seth Jones to the Chicago Blackhawks. For all intents and purposes, for our list of additions and subtractions to the current team, we're just going to say that we're swapping Seth Jones for Adam Boqvist, because that's kind of what, as far as who actually will probably make the team or players that have already played in the NHL, it's Adam Boqvist. So Adam Boqvist gets added. Seth Jones is out. Jake Bean is in from the Carolina Hurricanes. He finally, after all the years of saying the Carolina Hurricanes have a lot of defensemen, maybe they should get rid of one. They did go and get rid of two. Jake Bean and of course, Dougie Hamilton. And then the Cam Atkinson, Jacob Voracek, kind of a little bit of a swap, and maybe the biggest subtraction, John Tortorella, not a player, but certainly probably the face of the franchise for a little bit, and Tortorella also out. So big changes are arise for the Blue Jackets, and with Seth Jones gone, I think they're the one player everyone is going to be looking at is Zach Werenski and asking, can he be a true number one defenseman?
Yeah, that is definitely not out of the realm of possibilities. I really like his game. I mean, we know he can score some goals on that back end, and so now he doesn't have that protection of, pointing the finger, not that he's ever done that, but of, writers and analysts pointing the finger at Seth Jones, because he's been the guy for a while where you looked at it and you say, okay, he's the potential Norris type defenseman. Well, now he's gone, right? He was okay last year, and he's off to Chicago, signed a huge contract too. And so Werenski signs that huge extension as well for $9.5 million. So now it's put up or shut up time. And I think it was also a little bit of, Columbus saying, we don't want to lose another big name defenseman, so let's just pay him now.
Yeah. Think about where the Columbus Blue Jackets defense was last year, with Seth Jones, with David Savard. This defense has gotten definitely a younger look to it now. Werenski leading the way. He's 24. You got Jake Bean at 23. Boqvist is 21. And then Gavrikov at 25 as well. This is a defense that is going to probably have some growing pains. Now, they do have Elvis Merzlikins. He's locked up for a good while now at $5.4 million. Holy smokes. Seems like a big number for Merzlikins, but he is going to kind of carry this team through what I view as a very stark rebuild. And it looks kind of like this team is, are they rebuilding? Like they totally are because they ditched Seth Jones, but it looks like they're maybe still kind of trying because they, of course, brought in Voracek and, they still have some decent pieces, but is this team good enough to compete in this division? Like, is there anyone out there who thinks this could be a playoff team?
Yeah, I think probably not. I mean, when you look down the middle, right, that's the first place I look at when I look at this team, and I don't see anybody, right? Jack Roslovic is essentially your number one center at this point. So when you look past the lack of depth at the center position, I think now your focus, if this team is going to be anywhere close to being a playoff team, it has to be on Patrick Laine, right? This guy obviously just couldn't get it done last year. He wasn't scoring goals. He didn't try to blame anybody. He just basically wrote off last year and said, I'm done thinking about it. 10 goals in 45 games is just not good enough. And 21 points, obviously, again, not good enough. So I think if there's any hope for this team to get close to the playoffs, they need him to be back to that probably 35 to 45 goal range, to be quite honest.
Yeah, it's only been 4 years since he put that kind of production up. That was 17-18. I'm not sure. I mean, I'm sure that he could go out and he could score. And, he might because this team isn't going to be very good. And so maybe it's like, yeah, I'll just shoot the puck. Just see what you can do for you a little bit. I know that a couple of those years, they were really trying to focus on his defensive side. 28 goals in 68 games, what he had there in 1920. I mean, that's, he's on pace for a 35 goal season. It really last year, he fell off the mark. John Tortorella, I don't think was good for Laine's game. So we will see what Brad Larson can bring to the table and what he's got up his sleeve because you're right. If he can be really good, then maybe they can compete for like some playoff spot for a minute. Like there are some decent players on this team. It's just a matter of if it can kind of all come together. Like maybe the reason they bring in a Jacob Voracek is because, that guy can dish the puck. And maybe they're thinking he can come in and, if he can have another year where he's putting up basically 50 assists is what he's been paced for the last couple years. The last several years, darn close to 50 assists every year. If he can get close to that, you're probably looking at at least a 30-goal season for Laine. And that would be huge. That would be absolutely huge.
Yeah, and don't forget, too, they're going to have a healthy Gustav Nyquist back this year as well, too. And he's just 2 years removed from, basically putting up 50 points in 60 games on a terrible Red Wings team. So you think, okay, well, now he goes in and he maybe has a little bit more offensive help than he did when he was with those Red Wing, that Red Wing team back then. Sure. And so maybe a healthy Nyquist, maybe he can help them put up 20, 25 goals and, maybe another 25 assists, and he can really add some depth at that forward position for him.
Even so, even if all those things happen, I still see this team as there's just too much firepower in this division for me to even come close to putting Columbus into the playoffs. They maybe won't be last in the division, but I definitely don't think they're going to be third or fourth or even fifth in this division. I don't see it. If they were in the Pacific, I think there would be an argument for could this team make pull out a wild card spot in the Pacific? That would have potential. But in this Metro, there's no way. The Metro, the Eastern Conference is a freaking powerhouse. There are so many good teams in the Eastern Conference. The West, there are far more teams, I think, that you go, well, that team could be last, that team could be last, that team could be last. There's a good amount, when you count it up. Whereas in the East, you've really got Buffalo, Detroit, and I guess Columbus. I don't even see Ottawa as they're definitely going to finish last. No, that definitely not. I don't think Ottawa will finish last. And you look at the rest of the teams in that division, and I think that all of the rest of the teams outside of Buffalo and Detroit could make the playoffs in any division in the rest of the league, or in the West, I should say.
Okay.
Okay, so when it comes to Columbus, my big question for them is we know they're basically in a rebuild, whether they want to admit it or not. They're rebuild, retool, whatever. But how do they rebuild in such a way that it's going to put them in a position to actually be able to hang on to their talent moving forward? Because we watched everyone leave. Like everyone who could stay, once they become a UFA, they're out of there. And to me, it's something deeper than just, well, they need to win. Like, yeah, but they did have some nice playoff runs. I mean, there are teams that have not won in a minute, like the New Jersey Devils. They haven't won in a minute, and yet, Dougie Hamilton still wants to go sign there. You know, like name any team throughout the league, and you've got players who want to go and play in most cities that don't have especially American cities that like they can convince their own to stay. But for whatever reason, the Blue Jackets just cannot seem to keep people around. And maybe that was Tortorella.
Yeah, and I do think that is a big part of it, right? Because it's about creating a culture, not necessarily, okay, a lot of teams, especially teams like Colorado, Tampa Bay, you create this culture of winning, right? So it's a lot easier if maybe your coach or your management doesn't create a good internal culture. It's easy to keep guys because they know they're going to win there. However, with teams like this, yeah, it starts from management and the head coaching position down, because I think you need the right guys in place to make players, especially younger players, want to come there, right? And so, if this team is going to rebuild on the fly, not necessarily, through coaching and management, if they're going to do it too, they're going to have to convince some of their UFAs, some of their RFAs to stick around. And to do that, they might have to overpay. And then that means they're going to have to draft extremely well over the next few years so that they do bring in younger players who can develop and fill in and add some depth, add some scoring. So that way, guys on the free agent market can look and say, okay, cool, they've got some exciting young guys. Things are on the up and up for this team. The head coach is great. So let's hang around. I know they're in a little bit of a rough spot. And, again, when I look at a team like Detroit, right, a team I'm super familiar with, and we can talk about this a little bit more, but they've got a lot of young guys, and they've got a good culture with a guy like Stevie Yzerman who knows how to win. So now you build this thing where, like, once they get to that point where they start winning games, it's easy to bring in veteran guys. It's easy to bring in those free agents.
Right. Totally agree. Yeah, that's, by the way, rough news about Jacob Verana being out 4 months after getting shoulder surgery. Oh, that's brutal. That is going to be a big chink in the armor there for the Red Wings. That's too bad. Okay, let's we'll leave the Blue Jackets on that note and move across to another team in the Metro that has had struggles as of the last several years, and it's really been a minute since they were very competitive. It's like those Taylor Hall years, and the New Jersey Devils really trying to hit the reset button and kind of declare, not quite like the Ottawa Senators declaring it, but declaring it indeed, that the rebuild is kind of coming to an end. They lose Nick Merkley and Will Butcher. Pretty easy to put up with those losses. And you bring in Dougie Hamilton, Thomas Tatar, Ryan Graves, and add a solid backup goaltender in Jonathan Bernier. A really nice offseason for the Devils. A nice piece, like Bernier, a perfect compliment, I think, to have Mackenzie Blackwood. And now the question is this team poised to break out? And is Jack Hughes, are we going to see the number one overall pick show up and be what he should be? I mean, I'm not talking he needs to be Sidney Crosby, but is he going to be someone who you go, oh yeah, he should have, like, he's unreal. Time to like tip the caps. Maybe he's putting up close to a point per game. Are we going to see that kind of development from the Devils and from Jack Hughes?
Maybe.
All right, let's move on to the New York Islanders.
To be honest, you know what? It wouldn't shock me if we see between 60 and 70 points out of him this year. I'm not quite set on him being a point-per-game player yet, but you know what? I think he's making strides. He's moving in the right direction. And I think, again, he has the luxury, too, of playing behind a guy who is so good when it comes to the two-way game with Nico Hischier there. So I think there's no pressure on him to be that. So I think they're going to allow him to really develop right and not really rush him into being like, you have to be the number one guy. You have to be our top line center playing 23 minutes a game. They don't have to do that with him. And I think that's going to be, do him well over the next 2 or 3 years for when I think guys like Luke Hughes come in, right? His brother come in to play on the back end. PK Subban moves out and they bring in, maybe some other guys up front or at the back end to really, use that $9 million a little bit more wisely. And I think this team can really, really develop into something really nice here soon.
Yeah, I'm not sure that they're quite a playoff team yet, but I think that this is the way that this team's kind of structured now. Do you kind of see a little glimpse of what Ottawa was last year, where kind of just an iffy start, everybody's still kind of figuring their stuff out, and then they're able to kind of bring it together at the end of the year. A little bit of the pressure's off, but also the younger guys are really hitting their stride. You could make an argument that already actually happened to the Devils last year. They do have good experience on the back end. Like their back end is not bad at all. I mean, Dougie Hamilton, Ryan Graves, Ty Smith really showed up in the first year of his ELC. He 23 points in 48 games. I mean, that's a great rookie season for a 17th overall pick in 2018. And then, PK Subban, Damon Severson, like there's some decent guys on this back end who can certainly move the puck. And I don't think, in comparison to maybe some of the other teams in this division, like Carolina, the Rangers, the Islanders, I don't know that they have quite as good of a defense, but I'd venture to say that their defense is probably like very similar on skill level to like the Pittsburgh Penguins. You look, whose defense would you rather have, the Penguins or the Devils? Would you rather have Chris Letang or Dougie Hamilton? I mean, there's probably. I mean,
I'd probably still take Letang, but
maybe
but when you look at the defense
there's an argument to be made.
Sure, absolutely. But when you look at the defense as a whole, I'll take New Jersey all day. And then you look at the back end at goal, I'll take New Jersey all day over Pittsburgh's goaltending, right?
Yeah.
So, again, when you look at the teams that they have to play in this league, I think they're making the right strides. They're moving in the right direction. So, I mean, when you look at this top four defense as a whole, there's nothing to complain about. It's not like those teams usually at the bottom of the barrel where maybe they have one guy who looks really nice, but the rest of them are, just a bunch of, fifth and sixth, defensemen that are just, playing above their potential or playing extra minutes. And so, you know what, I like where this defense is going. It's still young enough with guys like Ty Smith, and Dougie Hamilton is still on the right side of 30. So, yeah, everything's moving in the right direction.
Yeah, I mean, and bringing in Thomas Tatar, he put up 30 points in 50 games. I mean, that's like a 45, maybe even better season than that, getting more minutes with New Jersey. Last year, kind of a rough year for an Andreas Janssen. Only 5 goals in 50 games. I think that he is better than that, and I wonder if he'll get one more crack here with the Devils being able to play up in their lineup, and maybe he's able to do a little bit more. And I think that there's some like Miles Wood, Jesper Bratt, like these are guys who they've shown that they can play. They can kind of move their way up and down the lineup and be pretty good. Pavel Zacha is starting to come into his own. He's had last year on pace for really like 50, almost 60 points. That's what he was on pace for last year. Like Pavel Zacha is probably the one guy in New Jersey that outside of New Jersey, no one's talking about him, but he could be a real player.
Yeah, and it's funny when you look at this forward group, if you look at, go on Cap Friendly for anybody who's curious, and you look at their signed forwards, 13 guys right now, only one guy, Thomas Tatar, is over the age of 26. That's exciting if you're a New Jersey Devils fan, because you can say, cool, we've got a lot of young guys who can still develop and still produce. And not only that, but I mean, next year you've got a ton of RFAs to re-sign, but you know what? Again, they're still young enough to where they can get these guys in at pretty good deals, to where, you know what? Hey, if you give a guy like Jack Hughes, $4 or $5 million and you get him signed for 3 or 4 years, that doesn't hurt you cap wise. And, again, there's nobody else really that's going to, hurt them as far as cap hits are concerned. So you still got plenty of time for these guys to develop and grow. And, 2 or 3 years from now, they could be a serious threat.
Now, here is this is what the New Jersey Devils should do if they're smart. And if they don't do it, obviously it means they're not smart, and I'm smarter than everyone associated with their organization. At this point, why the hell have you not offer sheeted Quinn Hughes and brought the brothers together? How dare you, New Jersey? How dare you?
Quinn Hughes, I don't think can be offer sheeted, so I don't think...
he can't. You're right.
No.
Yeah,
so, unfortunately. But I get where you're coming from, because, yes, if I was New Jersey, I would have made a phone call at least and been like, hey, what's the holdup? Is it over a few $1 million? Listen, we'll give you the next 3 first-round picks. I would throw that at them all day long and easily give up that kind of, or maybe 2 first-round picks and a couple really good players. Again, I would throw in Ty Smith in that package and try to bring in Hughes. So, again, you get the brothers in there, because, hell, if you get anything close to what the Sedins did for Vancouver, you're doing all right.
Just get those brothers in. That's what I want to see. But anyways, any way that you could make it possible. Like, what if you went and you said, hey, here's the deal. We'll issue an offer sheet to Elias Pettersson if you don't trade us Quinn Hughes. Just start going. Just start throwing threats around.
There you go.
We all just want to see the brothers together. That's when the Stalls came together and it was Jordan and Eric there for a while. For some reason, Mark just didn't want to come join, I guess. But you just want to see brothers play together. It's fun. Something about family is a good time. Okay. Can Lindy Ruff coach this team to the playoffs? Like, is he in a place where, like, is Lindy Ruff going to be the guy that gets this team to the playoffs? Maybe not this year, maybe next year, maybe the year after. Or is he there just to help some of these younger guys develop? Or is this like a long-term plan with Lindy Ruff?
Yeah, I think it's probably going to be a long-term plan. I don't know if he's necessarily the type of coach that will develop young guys. But I mean, you never know, right? So to me, I think he's there. I don't think they think of him as a stopgap, as like, they're going to go out and get another coach once this team's ready to go. I think they already know these guys are going to develop pretty well, and there's not a whole lot of developing that Lindy Ruff really needs to do himself outside of just being a good coach. Just be his normal self, right? He's not like one of those guys that are known for developing younger players, right? So, hey, he just goes out there and bees Lindy Ruff, and I think everything will work itself out.
It seems like the last time Lindy Ruff was successful was like 2008.
Well, I'll give you that. He's had some pretty horrible Buffalo teams, though.
Well, and Dallas. He was in Dallas there.
That's true. But for me, For me, the X factor for this team is the goaltending. Obviously, we know what's up front, and we know what Dougie Hamilton can bring. But like you mentioned earlier, I love Jonathan Bernier. I think he's a perfect addition. I'm very, very high in Mackenzie Blackwood. I might go as far as even put him in my top 10 goaltenders in this league, at least from what I think he's capable of. So, if Jonathan Bernier plays as well as he did in Detroit and New Jersey, I think they're going to be in fine shape. Okay,
final team for part 1 of our Metro is the New York Islanders. The Islanders, they trade with the Red Wings. They send Nick Leddy to the Wings. They acquire Richard Panik. They also sign Zach Parise and Zdeno Chara. So they snag the oldies. Andrew Ladd is dealt along with Jordan Eberle goes to the Seattle Kraken in the expansion draft, and Travis Zajac, who is only there for a hot minute, retires. And I will say, a nice addition, a healthy Anders Lee. That's a big boost to a team that definitely missed Anders Lee in the playoffs. Now, I'll say this, a lot of people, they're saying this team's a Stanley Cup contender, but what causes the result to be different this time? Like, they're a very similar team the last 3 or 4 years, like basically since Barry Trotz got there. They've have a very similar nucleus, and they've added little pieces here and there, and they went from this wow, they're all of a sudden good, to oh, maybe this team is a contender. Oh yes, this team's definitely a contender. What makes this year different? Justin, doesn't matter to me if you think they're going to win the cup. Why will this team win the cup this year?
You know what? I mean, I'm not confident that this team will win the cup. I'm confident that they could potentially win this division. However, again, this nucleus is pretty much the same, right? But the difference is obviously Anders Lee, right? He is going to have to be the difference for this team long term. A guy like Zach Parise, a guy like Zdeno Chara, to add that depth, when this team struggles up front. Because listen, they got put up against a high scoring team in Tampa Bay, and they just couldn't get it done, right? They looked outplayed. They looked like they were just lost at times. Now, again, Barry Trotz is a fantastic coach, and he'll keep these games close, but do they have that scoring depth? Do they have those guys that can really take over games? Outside of Barzal, there's really nobody on this team that I look at and I say, okay, this guy could take over a game, put up some goals, and really, push this team over the top. No, not really. And so, you know what? It's going to have to come from the back end. And what I mean by that is this team's going to have to shut guys down. And I think, between Varlamov and Sorokin, they're really going to have to find a way to win those close games.
Yeah, I do see certainly where, their back end is just very solid. Like there's a lot back there that you can, it's always nice to have Sebastian Aho Jr. back there too. But obviously their up front is where they're really everything, all their money is up front, right? Like the vast majority of their money is up front, and in their goaltending. I wonder what a full year of Kyle Palmieri can mean. That's something that's been tossed around. Can he kind of find his form? 25, 27, 24, 26 goals. The 4 years prior to last. I wonder, okay, last year he gets 10 goals. He's probably still a 20-goal scorer given the right scenario, especially he had 7 goals in the playoffs in 19 games. So you got to expect that he's going to score 20 goals for you. I guess I do like Anders Lee coming back. He also is now he's on the wrong side of 30 now. He's 31. Josh Bailey's 31. This team is starting to get up there in age, and it's like you kind of got to do this or not, because your core is starting to almost, in a way, not necessarily age out to where they're going to be bad, but you wonder the way that they play, if this is sustainable over 5, 6, 7 years, with these guys. And that would be my biggest question mark. So with that said, it's this might be the year. You got to win, or else this opportunity, this many players in their prime, ready to roll, might not come around again for a while. And you got to think that they're chomping at the bit. Can Semyon Varlamov have another basically a Vezina type season again? Is that going to happen? They got such good goaltending last year. It just isn't always the case every year. To me, they're just a hard team to say confidently, yes, they're definitely the best team in the division. All these other divisions, you go, well, yes, Vegas is the best team in that division. Yes, Colorado's the best team in the Central. Yes, I would say Tampa Bay is the best team in the Atlantic. They just won the Stanley Cup. They did lose their entire third line, but they're still, I think, they're still the best team. Now that doesn't mean that all those teams finish first in the division, because weird things can happen over the course of 82 games. But I think that it's fair to say that those are the best teams in those divisions. But in the Metro, a lot of people are saying the Islanders. Some people are saying the Capitals. Some people have the Hurricanes. Like this is a much more fluid division, and I think that it's because the Islanders, they play such a good team game that you're kind of thinking like, when is this not going to work anymore?
Right, and they're supposed to be a team, right, that's built for the playoffs. They're supposed to go out and help, supposed to bruise you and play those shutdown type of games to where they're going to be, tight 1-goal games. Now, again, I wonder if at any point Barry Trotz finally, lets Matthew Barzal off the reins and says, okay, go do your thing. Go back to your, point per game type production and just you be you, right? Where he broke out in this league with 85 points. And so, now that he's playing more of a, playing more responsible minutes, his production sort of dipped a little bit. And so then you look at a guy like Anthony Beauvillier too, who can, potentially grow a little bit more at 24. I think he's still got a little bit more to go. Are those two guys going to be able to, take them to the next level, right? And so, yeah, I'm with you, because you look at this core and they're really, outside of Matthew Barzal, really the majority of their guys are signed for 3, 4, 5 years. And so if you're not doing it here in the next year or two, you might have just effed yourself, because the way they do play that tight checking hockey, it might catch up with them, with a lot of these guys a little bit, in their, late 20s, early 30s. And, you can only play that way for so long.
Well, there are players, there's plenty of players who last into their 30s. Most don't. So you got to ask, like, which one of these guys are going to take a big nosedive in production? And the Islanders, well, they've got like an Oliver Wahlstrom, who's young. Obviously, Matthew Barzal's, he's 24, he's still young. Wahlstrom had a nice season last year. In a full season, he would have probably put up maybe 20, 25 goals and 40, 45 points in a full season if it was stretched out. He's kind of your one guy coming. There's not a whole lot outside of that where you go, oh yeah, we're like excited for some young talent. I mean, they've traded away a lot of their picks because they've been bringing in veteran players, and that's fair. I mean, that's how they got JG Pajot. That's how they got Kyle Palmieri. They're trading away first round picks.
Well, and the other question is, there's only so many minutes to go around, right? So when you start, most teams, they supplement depth by bringing in younger guys and drafting well to fill in those minutes, right? Well, if you've got a ton of guys signed for $4 or $5 million, for the next 3-4 years, you don't have available roster spots. You don't have, those second and third line minutes for these younger guys to develop.
That's a great point. Yeah. So then they're, having to come up in the AHL, which, is sometimes hit or miss.
And you can only go so far, right? I mean, you can only play so many talented guys to develop, right? So you need to play those tough minutes against better players to be better, right? You need to go up against those Sidney Crosbys and those Malkins, right? To really see if you've got what it takes to get to the next level.
Yeah, it's almost like this Islanders team needs their versions of, like, when the Penguins came up and it was like, oh, Brian Rust comes out of nowhere and is able to kind of fill in the top, because I mean, invariably some of these guys are going to go down with injury too. That's the other side of it, of the way that they play, is that someone's going to get hurt, and you need kind of that next layer of player to be available and to be playing the same type of way. Now, for all intents and purposes, the Islanders probably finish like pretty easily in the top 3 in this division. They are one of the better teams in this division. I just don't think that they're like an absolute lock to win the division by any means.
Yeah, so, won't disagree with you.
All right. Well, that's the first 4 teams in the division. We will, of course, get to the Rangers, the Flyers, Penguins, and Capitals in part 2. Stay tuned for that. You can find us on Twitter at OT Hockey Talk. Let us know what you think of our preview. If we miss something very key and very important, let us know. And until we meet again, we'll talk to you soon.